Thank you very much, Director. It's probable that the MPs will participate in the next 2 minutes. I'll now ask a friend of mine, Mark Sutton, to address me. Mark.
Oh, thank you very, very much, Dave. It's actually through another Dave that my old school friend Dave. Thank you, Mushtaq. Anyway, I think I'd really like to start by saying, well, I went to the Maldives over the summer, really at the invitation of Dave Harding and also President Nasheed, who we all went to the same school, which is all rather a happy tale. But actually, my interest in the Maldives goes back way further than that. I used to be editor of Tribune, of course, when Mohammed Nasheed kept on being put in prison, and half the Labour cabinet kept on going to the Maldives on their holidays. We did give space to him to put the case for democracy in the Maldives, and it's a fantastic achievement. What has happened in the Maldives is a fantastic achievement. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But as we all know, democracy is a fragile flower, and I think that the events over the summer, they've been outlined to you by some of the speakers already, show just how fragile that is and just how important it is for all those who believe in democracy to support the Maldives. Now, for a lot of people in this country who are generally rather ignorant about what happens in the rest of the world in many ways and don't know much about the Maldives because it's a small place of which we know very little, that is far away, to quote Mr. Chamberlain on Czechoslovakia, it is a country that does matter. There is a historic link that we know. One of the first comments that was made to me by one of the ministers in the government was, you British do have some responsibility here for what has happened, because the Maldives was a protectorate, as the Maldivians here will know. It was a sheikhdom, and unlike other territories that have been crown colonies or whatever, when Britain left, there were very few pillars for civil society that had been left behind, rather different in other countries. So the Maldives started with this rather authoritarian, autocratic history, and a history, as we all know, that continued for quite some time, and with the support of various governments that should have known better. And certainly, I used to have a bit of fun at one level, pointing out, well, I used to be on the Labour Party National Executive, pointing out to some members of the executive who were just about to go off on holiday to the Maldives, that the Maldives was actually being run by the Baathists, much as Iraq was run by the Baathists, which was just about to be bombed by the same Labour cabinet. But having said that, we have this remarkable democracy, and going there was an education in itself, because clearly, in a country that is small population, but a population that is hugely concentrated, as you know, one island, there is quite a febrile atmosphere and an awful lot of social pressures and all sorts of issues around poverty, around drugs, around an attraction to extremism amongst some people. There are a lot of people who are struggling. The idea that a lot of people in the West get of this being a fantastic tourist paradise is rather offset by the reality of what you see in Mali. Now, of course, there's absolutely no comparison. I've been a foreign correspondent. There's no comparison with many other countries. The Maldives is very different, but still that country has severe social problems and really does need a lot of assistance, I think. And Sir Ivan Lawrence has just gone, but he's been one of the guys, I think, that has been very helpful, because there's been some remarks already about the judiciary in the Maldives, and there's a particular problem, I think, that I discovered there. I mean, you do have clearly an issue if you've got a judiciary that really hasn't really gone much beyond O-level training in legal practice. There is a real problem, and more than that. I mean, but at the same time, I mean, what you have managed to see is not only an emerging democracy, but an alive, free press. It's been referred to already. Minivan. I read Minivan now. I read Minivan before I went. I read it much more regularly now. In a small democracy, something that is so alive and actually does present all strands of debate that is open is actually very, very refreshing. I went over there at the time when a couple of members of the opposition, very much from the old regime, had been put under temporary house arrest, and the British government, along with other governments, was rather concerned about this because It didn't believe that that was the right thing to do, that if these people had committed offences, then they needed to be put on trial or they needed to be released. And I think that President Nasheed did the right thing, but it shows you that democracy is that fragile flower, and that it wouldn't take an awful lot, perhaps, for things to change. It strikes me, though, that in all of this, we've got to be very careful in lecturing other countries. It's quite right for people in Britain to be concerned about what happens in the Maldives. It's quite right for the British government and opposition parties to say what they will. But they will be taken more seriously if their record is absolutely clean. We're lucky that we have in the government of the Maldives a very friendly and progressive government, and a government that is welcomed at the United Nations and is seen to be on the international scale on issues such as global warming and sea level rises and all the rest of it, very much a sort of motivating force. I would simply say that we need to be careful when we criticise other countries on human rights, when we have a glaring example not too far from the Maldives of abuse of human rights, which periodically is promised to be changed by British governments but still hasn't. And I refer to the Chagos Islanders, some 2,000 of whom were deported, unfortunately, when this guy Harold Wilson was Prime Minister, still languish in the slums of Port Louis, Mauritius, are still unable to return home, have won case after case after case, received promises from oppositions, but when it comes to governments, it's always no, you can't return. That case is now going to the European Court of Human Rights. Britain has to be very careful before we criticise other countries, because our record is not absolutely clean ourselves. I think for all the reasons we know, for historic ties, for what the Maldives are doing, for all of its imperfections, it is so clearly trying, and for all the problems the Maldives faces, it is clearly trying to overcome them. Britain and the European Union and other countries have really got to give that country all the support it can, and I think that there's an awful lot more that can come from the European Union in terms of aid and assistance towards the Maldives. And I hope that, even though for so many people in this country the Maldives is seen primarily as a tourist destination, President Nasheed and his government have made a real impact on the global stage at the United Nations over the environmental issues, as we know, that he and his government will be taken extremely seriously by Western governments and listened to, especially when they campaign over issues such as global warming and the threats faced by small island economies the world over. It was a real education for me to go to the Maldives. I'm a journalist, I'm naturally sceptical, possibly even slightly cynical. I came away thinking this country is really a country to be celebrated. We need to criticise when we have to, but let's try and give it all the support we can. And it's fantastic that Mushtaq and Third World Solidarity have organised this meeting. And thank you very much for asking me along.
Mark, thank you very much. As Dave has mentioned in the beginning, Third World Solidarity works with everybody and anybody, although we are very clear that we will never support a dictator. We will never support a king, possibly until there is a democracy or some sort of democracy. And later on, chair of executive committee, who happen to be journalists as well, will speak. But can I once again welcome everybody for this meeting, and there are many to come which will be announced in due time. But can I invite the next speaker? And I think young people and youth is the real hope for future. And our next speaker happened to be a student from Maldives studying in the United Kingdom. And I think we have to work very hard, as Mark and Rita and everybody has said, that the countries which are new democracies face always difficulty from judiciary, from media, from those who have ruled the country under iron fist for many, many years. And I think Pakistan is another example where I come from. Can I invite next speaker, who is Muhammad Yameen Shahid, a student.
Distinguished Chair, Her Excellency Dr. Farnaz Faisal, Honourable MPs, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank Her Excellency, the High Commissioner Dr. Faisal, and the chair and members of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the Maldives and the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the Third World for giving me this opportunity. I am indeed honoured to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, the Maldives is still an emerging democracy, facing a number of challenges in her efforts to develop, consolidate and strengthen her democratic institutions. One of the foremost challenges is to acquaint and familiarise the population with the concept of democracy and to meet the expectations of the public during these initial years. Public expectations are very high on all democratic institutions to show results quickly and to make a tangible change to the everyday life of the citizens. However, our endeavour has to be a long-term one if we are to succeed in instilling democratic principles in the hearts of our people. This, I believe, would be the only way to ensure a viable democratic society based on the rule of law. We can start by working on education, an area that really needs to be further developed. We have near universal literacy in the country. Goal 2 of the Millennium Development Goals, achieving universal primary education, was attained in 2002. And also, a very high percentage of children have access to secondary schooling. However, access to university education is still limited, as we yet do not have a university in the country. This, as you can imagine, puts a lot of the youth at a disadvantage, as not many of us have the funds necessary to pursue further education abroad. Furthermore, the lack of the development in the education system prompts the youth who have the means to study abroad to leave the country for good, because they see more opportunities overseas than they do in our own country. Of course, this poses a very serious problem, as to develop the country, we need the intellectuals to stay in the country as opposed to leaving it. An educated youth, I believe, is essential in solidifying our infant democracy. As democracy has only just been established in our country, politicians need to work together to make the concepts work and to apply to everyday politics within the government to set up a cohesively run state. Even if the politicians do not agree with one another, they should remember that their first goal should be to serve the people's best interests. Furthermore, the politicians need to show that they are following the concepts of democracy in order to establish faith and confidence in the democratic system, as well as in their own government, to reassure the people that the system in place will not turn into another dictatorship. If the public loses faith and trust in the new system of governance, the entire country has much to lose. Another issue that we need to work on is the drug problem, which has sadly become a growing problem amongst the youth. Considering that they make up an alarming percentage of our population, the problem should be dealt with appropriately and urgently. It has come to my attention that when dealing with victims of drug abuse, there is a tendency to use excessive force rather than to rehabilitate the offenders. A clear distinction needs to be made between drug traffickers and victims of drug abuse when dealing with this issue. Whether it's because they're having problems at home, they're doing poorly in school, they're not blossoming socially, or simply out of pure boredom, the youth often get involved in drug and gang culture because of the need to escape from their own lives. Therefore, to prevent them from falling into this culture to begin with, extracurricular programs other than just sport should be developed within schools to cater to different students' interests and to keep them active. These are fundamental issues that need to be addressed in our newly established democracy. Maldives today has a new modern constitution with one of the most forward-looking human rights chapters in it. There are several challenges already faced in implementing this. A culture of tolerance, of accommodation of others' views, and of listening to opposing arguments need to be developed. Human rights can only be fully respected, protected, and guaranteed in such an environment. Today we are, I am sad to say, very foreign to these ideas. I have every confidence that the Maldivian youth will rise to these challenges and will make sure that we deliver a mature democracy to our future generations. We will resolve the drug problem. We will provide better education for the future generations. We will live by democratic principles. Maldivian democracy will be a success story.